Welcome to the School of Love, the place where miracles are normal. Hello, and welcome to the School of Love, the place where we learn practical tools based on scientific research and our own experiences towards improving ourselves, living life to its fullest, and contributing to the best of our abilities to the world around us. I am Dr. Maria Grajdian, and I am a professor of media studies and anthropology at Hiroshima University. In my free time, I am doing my best to guide you in building up a life of contentment, joy, and fulfillment while applying lessons learned in school to overcome the difficulties, challenges, and insecurities of the real world. This video focuses on Takarazuka Revue strategies to reinvent Japan's mythological and mythical origins within an expanding globalized market by mid-2000s, and while employing symbolical feminine and androgynous instances in the lead roles, while taking into account the multiple layers in Takarazuka Revue's administration and self-orchestration, such as performance politics, the economic supervision of brand-related consumption, the social culture management of actresses and fandom, including fans and fan communities, and the performances themselves. The performance Susano-o from 2004 also served as a means to counterpoint Takarazuka Revue's overwhelming and overwhelmingly compelling display of masculine idealization embodied in its otokoyaku, or female impersonators of male roles. Particularly the last 30 years, since the opening of the new Grand Theatre in Takarazuka in 1993, marked an unexpected tendency in Takarazuka Revue's public appearance, visible both in the increasing lavishness of its performances and in the intensified commercialization of the increasingly androgynous otokoyaku figures. The transition from ethics to aesthetics and from imagination to ideology in Takarazuka Revue's marketing of historic geographical spaces reflects and condenses its metamorphose from an insignificant social culture medium to a powerful political economic message in post-war Japan, as well as Japan's emerging awareness from being an outsider to the Western world to gradually becoming an insider of the Asian community. Founded in 1913 by Kobayashi Ichizo, one of the most significant entrepreneurs in pre-war Japan, the all-female popular musical theatre Takarazuka Revue proved itself, along its more than centennial existence, both a faithful mirror of and an influential model for the Japanese society. Simultaneously conservative in its gender representation and progressive in its performance practice, a contradictory symbol of the Japanese modernity and Japan's leading figure in the entertainment industry, emerged from the syncretic cross-gender tradition of the centuries-old classical Japanese stage arts, and challenging that very tradition through the creative employment of Western music and dramatic plots, Takarazuka Revue reconstructs in a specific way asymmetric interactions between identity and alterity, model and copy, history and geography, obtrusively displayed in sparkling tunes, fairy tale-like sceneries, and gorgeous costumes. And now, first things first, that is, two important disclaimers. The first disclaimer serves to strongly emphasize the fact that this YouTube channel, The School of Love, is not part of my educational and research activities at Hiroshima University. It is nonetheless part of my privilege, joy, and sense of duty to propagate and implement knowledge, information, as well as motivation and inspiration outside the limited framework of academic endeavors. Together, we can build up a better tomorrow for as many of us as possible. The second disclaimer relates to the fact that I am a trained musicologist and musician, not a psychologist, therapist, or counselor. The ideas I'm sharing in my videos reflect my deep-going preoccupation with life, my own life and other people's lives, and express the results of my experience, research, and for better or for worse, my failures, and my recovery from those failures, recovery which is still ongoing and continuously ongoing. The ideas expressed in the videos on this channel, named The School of Love, cannot and may not and must not replace the consultation with specialists in whichever areas of your life you might have questions or you might struggle with. If you are new to the channel, at this moment I would like to ask you to please consider subscribing, sharing, liking, commenting. Thank you very, very much. This helps us not only with that mysterious algorithm, which seems to dominate the galaxy of YouTube, but also with contributing to the expansion of the community of humans doing their best to impact positively the world and those around them by discovering their authentic selves and living life wholeheartedly. Thanks again. As a theatrical medium deeply rooted in Japanese tradition, the all-female popular musical theater Takarazuka Revue has become, since its foundation in 1913 by Kobayashi Chizo, one of the most significant entrepreneurs in pre-war Japan, a symbol of Japanese entertainment industry and cultural consumption. Takarazuka Revue proved itself, along its more than centennial existence, both a faithful mirror of and an influential model for the Japanese society. Simultaneously conservative in its gender representation and progressive in its performance practice, a contradictory symbol of the Japanese modernity and Japan's leading figure in entertainment industry, emerged from the syncretic cross-gender tradition of the centuries-old classical Japanese stage arts and challenging that very tradition through the creative employment of Western music and dramatic plots. Takarazuka Revue reconstructs in a specific way asymmetric interactions between identity and alterity, model and copy, history and geography, obtrusively displayed in sparkling tunes, fairy tale-like sceneries, and gorgeous costumes. Thus, though Takarazuka Revue is an important genre from the West, mainly influenced by the French Revue since the 1920s, and additionally by the American musical since the 1960s, it relevantly continues the Japanese cross-gender theatrical tradition. This theater tradition is emblematically represented by No and Kabuki, with their highly stylized gender and social representations. Still, Takarazuka Revue functions as the ideological and aesthetic foundation of several genres of Japanese contemporary culture, both those categories of Japanese contemporary culture which have recently been recognized worldwide as globalized culture products such as manga, anime, video games, and those which are still deeply locally implemented, such as television dramas, television shows, and the idol phenomenon. The ideological dimension of Takarazuka Revue's influence upon the domestic popular culture appears firstly in the energy, passion, and vitality radiated by most of such products. Secondly, it is obvious in the description of Japanese modern entertainment culture as a long, uninterrupted history of love, peace, and courage, with focus on friendship, effort, and victory. At least since 1968, the founding year of manga magazine Shonen Jump. These features are supposed to be related to Takarazuka Revue's motto, purity, righteousness, beauty, or in Japanese, Kyoku Tadashiku Utsushiku. The aesthetic dimension of Takarazuka Revue's influence on Japanese culture, on the other hand, could be observed in the almost obsessive quest for endlessly long legs and incredibly big eyes in Japanese everyday life, which goes back to Tezuka Osamu and his open enthusiasm for Takarazuka Revue. Takarazuka Revue's market-connected characteristics cannot be denied, as its relevance rests on its sellability, that is, the capacity to sell tickets. Yet, Takarazuka Revue is simultaneously subjected to an unusually strong dialectics. As a strong appearance of the early 20th century, Takarazuka Revue contains strong elements belonging to the global market. Indeed, it continues the Japanese theater tradition of cross-gender. Moreover, it was imported from the West and profoundly influenced the domestic entertainment and consumption industry, a part of which has been accepted and recognized worldwide during the last decades. This in turn has metamorphosed into new Western genres of popular culture, only to be perceived and absorbed subsequently by the Japanese public world as Western entertainment forms. While taking into account the multiple layers in Takarazuka Revue's administration and self-orchestration, performance politics, the economic supervision of brand-related consumption, the social cultural management of actresses and fandom, fans and fan communities included, as well as the performances themselves, this video focuses on Takarazuka Revue's strategies to reinvent Japan's mythical and mythological origins within an expanding globalized market and target audience. Particularly the last 30 years, since the opening of the new Grand Theatre in Takarazuka in 1993, marked an unexpected tendency in Takarazuka Revue's public appearance, visible both in the increasing lavishness of its performances and in the intensified commercialization of the increasingly androgynous otokoyaku figures or female impersonators of male roles in Takarazuka Revue. Indeed, the hidden pervasive tension between otokoyaku, that is, female impersonators of male roles in Takarazuka Revue, and musumeyaku, namely female impersonators of female roles in Takarazuka Revue, has been repeatedly mentioned as playing an important role in creating gender-based and social role models in modern and contemporary Japan. However, this very tension is also at the roots of Takarazuka Revue's lasting and efficient impact as a mass medium on audiences and critics with wide ramifications beyond the performances themselves. Thus, Takarazuka Revue's position as a cultural institution within the Japanese modernity possibly carries deep-going and wide-reaching messages of a new identity paradigm based on love, harmony, and playful togetherness. While drawing on issues of cultural imperialism as a harmonious adventure, I trace back the ideas in this video on the concept of imagined communities as historically created structures within the imperialistic discourse. A second important notion is that of invented traditions, as elements included in the discursive flow of structuring and consolidating Takarazuka Revue's position as a leading cultural institution in late modernity. The analysis is pursued on two levels. Firstly, the intrinsic level, referring to the form and contents of the performances. Secondly, the extrinsic level, connected to the cultural, social, economic, and political dimensions of Takarazuka Revue as a historical phenomenon in the context of the Japanese modernity and of the modern world at large. In order to illustrate these statements, I proceed in three steps. Firstly, by tracing back three strategies employed to construct identity paradigms as represented on stage by reinvigorating Japan's mythical and mythological roots, Metaphysics of Gender, Irony, and Nostalgia. Secondly, by elucidating the two main figures of Takarazuka Revue, the androgynously ambivalent and charismatic otakoyaku and the apparently conformist and impersonal musumeyaku from this performative perspective. And thirdly, in the conclusion, by examining the emerging form of cultural imperialism as a new form of identity awareness based on love and tenderness as existential attitudes. Otakoyaku and musumeyaku are regarded intrinsically in their own stage embedding within performances and extrinsically as social actors in the public sphere subject to limits, regulations, and circumstances generated both by the quotidian Japanese society and by the imaginations and expectations of Takarazuka Revue's specific environment, especially fans and administrators' prescriptions. As an exemplification of my theoretical explanations on cultural imperialism based on mythological resources, I take the performance Susano-o from the year 2004, enhancing the festivities to celebrate Takarazuka Revue's 19-year existence, performed by the Snow Troupe, starring the golden combination composed of top star Otokoyaku Asami Hikaru as Susano and top star Musumeyaku Maikaze Rira as Inada Hime. The first part of a typical Takarazuka Revue performance, the plot of Susano is based on the ancient Japanese myth of Susano and the many-headed serpent Yamada no Orochi. As to be shown later on, the colorful and highly conflicting worlds of gods and humans are displayed joyfully in spite of the dramatic content, with strong insinuations of Yamato or Old Japan as being a powerful link between East and West, a precursor of a new world order governed by love, peace, and happiness. The main character of this drama in verse, as it is pre-titled, is Susano, the Shinto god of wind and sea and the youngest brother of Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, and of Tsukiyomi, the god of the moon. According to the tale, Amaterasu and Susano produced children, she from pieces of his world, he from her necklace. But they had a disagreement, and Susano became violent. He was banished from the high celestial plane, and Amaterasu hid in a cave in protest, casting Yamato, the ancient land of Japan, into darkness. While allowing for several free interpretations of the mythological material, Takarazuka Revue's version of Susano's story openly displays in an array of mixed messages and obtrusive media-related policies 3 levels of identity construction in Japan's late modernity as a capitalist post-industrialized nation, a vision of identity as harmonious desire and playful togetherness instead of the more widely represented reality of competitive undertaking. Thus, instead of a design of conflicting gender interactions, Susano and Inada Hime embody what one might call the metaphysics of gender beyond historic geographical regulations. Furthermore, there is an ironical interplay of the gods' and humans' worlds and necessities in opposition to the more popular separate universes. Finally, the dialectics of soft power as an alternative to hard power on the way to smart power suggests a rather peaceful cooperation on an international level within the framework of cool Japan as culturally imperialistic endeavor. Throughout Takarazuka Revue's post-war history and its staging of identity, it was mainly the androgynously charismatic and ambivalent figure of otokoyaku that transported its ideals. Caught within a strongly dialectical movement between traditional role models and innovative consumption patterns, and compared to the apparently submissive and conformist Musumeyaku, otokoyaku's objectivization to a symbol of desire and site of projection, to use Julia Kristeva's termini, led to a playful coolness displayed obtrusively on as well as off stage. To begin with, one recalls Kobayashi Ichizo's statement that audiences should desire the otokoyaku but identify themselves with Musumeyaku. Thus, every otokoyaku metamorphosed from a model of male presence into a mirror of female identity projections. She abandons the sphere of her own identity and accedes to the public sphere. She becomes a symbol of something which she cannot possibly be, and she must obey the limits, rules, and circumstances imposed upon her from the outside. Like Don Quixote in another spatial and temporal culture, who, in the second part of the novel, meets persons having already read the first part of the novel and who must be faithful to the book which he has himself become and protect it from misapprehensions, counterfeits, and apocryphal continuations, to paraphrase Michel Foucault. An otokoyaku must follow her own discourse and transform herself into an object of the process which she herself, as a subject, had originally created. It is indeed a romantic, friendly, metaphorical work, softly melting fantasy and substantiality into one. Takarazuka Revue's otokoyaku as desire object and projection site transforms the otaku cliché into a hero. The otokoyaku reacts with the reinforcement of her position as a mirror of the self and a window to the other, while internalizing her position as a female impersonator of male roles. In doing so, the otokoyaku metamorphoses into a figure of longing and paradoxically belonging. Thus, on the way of constructing Susano and Inada-hime, there were two pathways of proceeding. On the one hand, the charismatic, extroverted Toto, or in German der Tod, interpreted as a death god or shinigami in the Takarazuka Revue adaptation of Elizabeth, the Rondo of Love and Death, of the Vienna premiered Elizabeth, and who expresses the failure to reinforce clear ideals in the here and now. Subsequently, Susano only accentuates the crisis of the human being in the era of general liquefactions, of identity, of culture, and of gender. On the other hand, the Musumeyaku, as represented by Inada-hime in her aestheticization of identity patterns, strikes for once as the stylized concretization of the liberated femininity. It is the tolerated competence to fulfill and to represent oneself, although simultaneously questioned through the cute appearance. Though Kobayashi Ichizo was no feminist and feminist movements were for him devious, he was aware of the power of the female instance in Japanese culture. Moreover, the cultural stylization of Japaneseness in late modernity as Musumeyaku and its transformation into an identity paradigm through the instrumentalization of the Takarazian or Takarazuka Revue actress gains clean contours. In contrast to the image of liberated femininity in other fields of popular culture, such as anime and manga, the Takarazuka Revue's Musumeyaku is powerful and self-confident without being sexually objectified and without losing her humanity in the empowerment process by metamorphosing into a monster or a cyborg. The simultaneous exhibition of power and cuteness in Musumeyaku's figure relates to her simultaneous consumerist and self-stylizing roles as two sides of the same coin. The Musumeyaku answers with open femininity instead of aggressive sexuality, as is sometimes the case in anime and manga, and behaves according to her own rules within the crumbling patriarchal system. Herein lies the reason why the liberated femininity as embodied by the Musume-aku in Takarazuka Revue may seem strong, but not so strong so that her femininity breaks down. Basically, she must feature the traces of her future motherhood, and this is where her definitive power hides, in contrast to the traditional and conventional image in the West as well as in Japan that motherhood and sexual satisfaction equal disempowerment. It is by now clear that the performance practice transformed Otokoyaku's cool reticence and Musume-aku's cute submission into behavior models and identification ideals without including resistance as an alternative existential model. In combination with the Otokoyaku female characters, the Musume-aku would develop, propagate, and implement a new form of feminine instance to compete with the insufficiency of ideological models and aesthetic credos in late modern Japan. The female ideal as staged by the Takarazian is simultaneously anti and pro-establishment. Her ideological ambivalence relates to the potentially subversive plots and conformist solutions. In an increasingly disenchanted world, the possibility became obvious that Musume-aku could represent an emotional ideal by using her own feelings as engine of self-fulfillment. This is a very important switch which confers women as potential mothers and educators a previously underestimated power most evident in Musume-aku's discreet elegance and composed submission. The Takarazuka Revue like, and by extension the Japanese versions of new forms of assiduity and modesty, or in German Fleiß und Bescheidenheit, as basic principles of an innovative, future-oriented interaction with the middle-class ideals. As largely advertised, Takarazuka Revue defines itself as a world of love, or in Japanese, Ai no Sekai, and the symbol of Japan. In this train of thoughts, the transition from ethics to aesthetics and from imagination to ideology in the public staging of history and geography in Takarazuka Revue actively reflects its metamorphosis from an insignificant social culture medium to a powerful political-economical message in post-war Japan. Simultaneously, this same transition of Takarazuka Revue from a classical mass medium to a symbolical message reinforces Japan's increasing awareness from being an outsider to the Western world to becoming an insider of the East Asian community. One important element is the fact that, as represented by Takarazuka Revue, Japan does not fight anymore against the cliches and contradictions imposed upon it by centuries of benevolent or misled communication and research, but rather proudly assumes these very cliches and contradictions and moves on in its historic geographical endeavor within the East Asian community in a first step. A second step would be the whole world. Its missionarism backs on the ideology of East Asia as an imagined community patterned upon Japan's goals and roadmaps, so that the invention of traditions is a source of inspiration to deal with the issues of the present while converting the past into a rich repository of images and sounds. To overcome guilt, trust in others and self-confidence are built upon similarities with hegemonial powers and discrepancies to minor nations, especially East Asian. There is naturally the display of Japan, represented by Takarazuka Revue, as a leading paternalistic figure. However, the overcoming and healing of its own historical wounds is, in this reading, a first step on the way to recognize own errors and misfortunes, to honestly repent for this, and to pragmatically undertake the sincere attempts towards their reparation, at least on stage. For instance, in the scene called The Lesser Gods, featuring Ame no Uzume, the Shinto goddess of entertainment known for her androgynous appearance, and Tajikarao, the Shinto god of force known for his powerful and charismatic masculinity from Susano-o, the two gods playfully sing of the gods' community as a joyful community, very similar to the world of humans, cheerfully dealing with urgent problems such as the disappearance of Amaterasu, the goddess of sun, in a cave due to the fight with her brother Susano, thus causing internal darkness on the earth. It is a highly symbolical scene, connecting and humanizing the gods, and still keeping the polite distance between the worlds. Manipulation of values and ideals, as well as their non-committal integration within the framework of the plots and identification modes, stand on stage for the historically emergent disbelief in inherited and as such established existential attitudes. The emergence of individual tensions calls for collisions between the semiotic and the symbolic level of identity construction in Julia Kristeva's reading of the process, and is reflected in the emblematic figures of Takarazuka Revue's intrinsic and extrinsic world, actresses and audiences during the last 3 decades, since the opening of the new Grand Theatre in Takarazuka. Rather than individuals and histories, blockbusters reminiscent of the 1970s and 1980s highlight the liquefaction process of identity while stressing Japanese righteousness as a new attitude mode. A basic issue in this context is a transition from cute to cool, in an anthropological sense, that is, in Joy Henry's parlance, the emancipation from being represented by others, in Lacan's words, being the phallus, to in self representing oneself and the others, in Lacan's words, having the phallus. Historically speaking, the economically determined excess, consumerism, and surplus as life paradigms, the enthusiasm as the predominant emotion, the individualization of society, and the cultural self-confidence as the counterpart to political exuberance from the previous decades, 1960s until the end of 1980s, are inevitably followed during the 1990s and the 2000s by a period of necessary and partially painful reconsideration of Japan's position within the world community, as nation and as people. Due to the fact that after the end of the Pacific War, so in 1945, openly missionarist performances as before and during the war directly relating to modern or contemporary Asia were forbidden, in order to express the Japanese ethos, 2 representation techniques common in literature or drama were employed: the flight into mythology or pre-modern era, and geographical relocation. Susano-o appears as one of the most obvious performances of the first category. Social and cultural meanings and identities are not only to be transmitted, implemented, naturalized, but first of all to be compiled within complex rhetorical systems in which the unstated and the unperformed are considerably more important than the openly stated, respectively, performed facts. In Susano-o, apart from the mythological contents, the effort to display Japan as linking element and peace ambassador in the East Asian and possibly international community becomes paramount. Thus, in year 2004, the main figure Susano, the Shinto god of wind and sea, speaks of Yamatos, that is, of all Japan's unifying power, a symbol of a new peaceful world order, with Japan as linking element between the East and the West, clearly expressed in the title song Yamato, The Departure.
このヤマトにいつの日かまた光がよみがえるようにおーヤマトよ東を望めば朝日を仰ぐ黄金の海よその国希望への架け橋海の形にそびえ立ち人々の願いを東へ西へつなぐ
cynical eclecticism usually displayed in historical shows, Susano-o draws on a deeply warm humanism, clearly tackling the problematic of the integration of the self within community and of self-sacrifice in the name of community, a very specific topic in most of the notable performances. Thus, the great heroes, usually solitary and isolated, find their struggle easier to carry on when pursued in the name of the community they find themselves belonging to after having strolled in loneliness through life. Compassion replaces cold irony. Confidence in the eternity of human togetherness replaces sarcasm. And the contact with the simple joys of life, such as physical love usually displayed very openly in Takarazuka Revue performances of recent decades, disclose in the life experiences of such solitary heroes a new pathway of self-discovery and self-acceptance. This is basically the idea of playful togetherness instead of solitary trip, a solution to current problems which gradually leads to a soft acceptance of belonging as individual within community and history. However, since the beginning of the 2000s, the box office has turned into the focus, developing beauty into a new zeitgeist. Confronted with an increasing social culture fragmentation, the Takarazuka Revue blockbusters of the last decades deal with the anonymization of the masses and the alienation of the individuals within those very masses. There is a permanent disenchantment process downwards to an increasingly pessimistic worldview and existential vision, culminating in such technical formal productions as The Phantom, inspired by Gaston Leroux's novel The Phantom of the Opera, or Gubijin, and precedented by performance with similar dimensions such as The Phoenix in 1994, Elizabeth, The Road of Love and Death from 1996, based on Michael Kuntzes and Sylvester Levay's musical from 1992 from Vienna. The few rays of hope and light in such performances as The Map Without Borders from 1995, The Spring in Prague from 2002, and Paradise Prince from 2008 are unexpected exceptions in an ideological aesthetic environment dominated by lack of enthusiasm and courage. Here, identity is experienced momentarily and individually. Not only did the social, economic, and political events in the dawn of the 1990s induce the general culture apathy, but so did the gradual loss of center in an anomic world and the disintegration of social structures. There are no more moral models, but charismatic stars embedded in breathtaking performances to symbolize the death of the ethics and the all-encompassing emergence of the aesthetics, so that the delight of imagination is replaced by the hegemony of ideology. While staging love as the catalyst of identity, Takarazuka Revue productions adapt to the new historical circumstances and hardly allow for illusions. They now reflect the needs and compulsions of a new era, lacking centers or borders. The economic disaster and political discomfort, while confronting the international community, correspond to the social-emotional conditions of disenchantment, dislocation, solitude, and cultural confusion. Without attempting to obtrusively display models to imitate or pathways to follow, Takarazuka Revue labeled blockbusters penetrate nowadays more than ever the public consciousness, domestic as well as global. This marketing strategy is a consequence of the Japanese fans' disappointment visible in decreasing sales figures and, in turn, calls for a basic reconsideration of Takarazuka Revue's position within the spectrum of Japanese modern culture, possibly as an integral part of a larger world culture. It is by now a generally acknowledged truth that Japan is trying to redefine superpower as a culture issue. Moreover, Japan is trying to redefine superpower through the reinvention of humanity as a transcendent endeavor and an orchestration of tenderness as an emergent identity paradigm. Otokoyaku is an ideological construction mirroring female desires and expectations, and as such is an illusionary identity which can never be attained. Fans' fulfillment in the imaginary world should conform to the Otokoyaku's magic, but also place them on the Musumeyaku's level. The emergence of a new identity paradigm based on tenderness, or in Japanese yasashisa, calls for a fresh dynamic manipulation of middle-class ideals through the restructuring of emotional values, Simultaneously, the fundamental reconsideration of Takarazuka Revue's position within the spectrum of Japanese modern culture as a possibly integral part of a larger world culture rests upon its administrators' awareness that incorporative isolation is no alternative to indiscriminate internationalization. This dialectic handling of the self and of the other requires, according to the existential model promoted by Takarazuka Revue, a re-evaluation of humanity, not as competitive undertaking, but as a playful togetherness in its quest for transcendence. In recent performances, the overcoming of a capitalist human ideal, that is, someone who is prudently restrained in the office and widely anarchic in the shopping mall, and the turning of the spotlight towards more normative concerns, like the integration of the individual within community, the importance of the family, the nostalgic depiction of one's homeland, the enhancement of money and career as a means of making a living and not as an ultimate existential goal, and the moderate patriotism, however arguable they might be elsewhere, gradually led to the reformulation of a re-solidified identity paradigm as self-reflexive project to harmoniously unify lucidity and compassion, courage and perseverance, sincerity and respect. This seems to be the core structure of the homo tenor, or the tender human, calling for a more affectionate relationship with the self and the other. The starting point of this analysis was the assumption of Takarazuka Revue's ability to reflect and convert the social cultural tendencies of late modern Japan by reinventing its mythological roots. As a self-proclaimed mirror of the Japanese world, Takarazuka Revue absorbs the current historical tendencies in Japan and transforms them artistically. The arrival point of this analysis seems to be the issue that tenderness, as promoted by Takarazuka Revue, emerges as the ideological and aesthetic core of a fresh identity paradigm to be adopted, reproduced, and perpetuated by approved mass media. Through tenderness as an existential attitude, one could rediscover one's own humanity due to a softer interaction with the self and the others. The rediscovery of this lost or forgotten humanity might lead to the regaining of control over one's own life in opposition to George Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. During the last 10 years, tenderness configures as the symbolic core of a new identity paradigm, both in Takarazuka Revue's performance practice and in its marketing strategies, leading to the development of fresh life patterns. It is a progressive return to the creatively loaded early 1930s, when Kobayashi Ichizo compiled and introduced the Takarazuka Revue motto, Kyoku Tadashiku Utsushiku, purity, righteousness, beauty, as existential slogan. If, as culturally presented in Takarazuka Revue's productions recently, discreet elegance and composed submission become the new social paradigms, then responsibility and courage, hard work, and humility become the new political-economic paradigms, implementing the Japanese solutions as a life model. Balanced by nostalgia as an emotional layer, these existential patterns, conditioned by tenderness, are the catalyst of cultural revitalization and the basic principles of a liberal, optimistic generation of middle-class aspirations. Ultimately, Takarazuka Revue reinforces tenderness emerging from the rightful handling of compassion and hope, lucidity and perseverance as a solution to current problems and misunderstandings within the international community, a correct manipulation of love that can propagate and implement peace, prosperity, and happiness. However, the Japaneseness of such solutions is less stressed in the plots and in the construction of the characters of recent performances. Rather, the universality of these aspirations and the necessity of a stable identity paradigm in clear historical context seem the main issues displayed on stage and in the marketing campaigns carried publicly. Beyond it, stylistic cacophony, ideologic inconsistency, and aesthetic contradictions, Takarazuka Revue blossoms out incessantly as a romantic world, and first of all, as a world full of longing for romantics. As a dynamic alternative to the modern Japanese everyday life, which is infused with Western influences, dominated by consumerism, suffocated by excess and surplus, Takarazuka Revue offers, through the overwhelming display of these parameters, the Western-like appearance of the actresses, consumption driving marketing strategies, excess and surplus celebrating performance practice, the model of a rigorous, disciplined lifestyle as a means to experience individual and national fulfillment by focusing on important tasks. This model is concretized in the slender, fragile, shy Takarazuka, attempting a parallel option to the prevalent role models circulating in the Japanese everyday culture, highlighting a positive, dialectical, still clearly outlined worldview. In the process of identity stylization in contemporary Japan, the Takarazuka appears simultaneously as the essence of the Japaneseness and as a chaos driving force within the traditional patriarchal order as a result of the strict feminist educational system and due to the powerful symbols she is loaded with. However, for the creation of a singular, univocal, autonomous identity paradigm compatible with late modern challenges, such a disturbing instance is inevitable. The disorder permanently insinuated by the Takarazuka in the tense stress ratio between otokoyaku and musumeyaku mirrors the instability and ambiguity of Japanese modernity as reputed monolith. In spite of legitimate and rather intellectual reservation in this concern, more than 100 years after its emergence, Takarazuka Revue has become what its founder Kobayashi Ichizo had dreamt of. The self-conscious icon of New Japan as Wako Nyosai, a unique synthesis of Japanese spirit and Western knowledge and technology, emblematically embodied by the ambivalent, fascinating, and mysterious figure of the Takarazuka, confronting prevalent geographic historical ambitions with possible unprecedented alignments and perspectives. That would be from me for today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to me. And as always, I'm looking forward to welcoming you here very soon again. Love and peace to you all.